The night fell over Beirut on September 27, 2024. Something older than any headline shifted beneath the city's skin. A name that had defined a generation of conflict, whispered in basements, preached in mosques, plotted about in war rooms, vanished from the very shadow it had lived inside. This is the story of that night, the patient observation, the maps drawn in secret, the quiet calls that led to an operation so precise it stunned governments and upended balance across a region. Not a political essay, not a theory, a forensic tracing of a shadow operation, a step by careful step. Hassan Nasrallah had been the public face of Hezbollah for decades. To supporters, he was a strategist and guardian. To opponents, a commander who transformed a militia into a political and military power. He worked by secrecy on multiple layers, public speeches, closed councils, subterranean command sites. Over time, that secrecy became part of the strategy: mobility, invisibility, compartmentalization. By late 2024, the fighting that had begun months earlier in other theaters had rippled into Lebanon. Skirmishes, intelligence skirmishing, and targeted strikes had already sharpened nerves. The idea that Nasrallah could be directly targeted had moved from remote possibility to real contingency in intelligence circles. For the teams watching him, it wasn't about idols or ideologies. It was about patterns, where he met, when his security rotated, which buildings sheltered command rooms. Those patterns, once reliably observed, produced moments that intelligence services and planners can, if they choose, exploit. Big operations began small, a handful of observations, a profile stitched from satellite images, intercepted transmissions, human reporting. In this case, multiple sources point to weeks of concentrated interest on a cluster of buildings in southern suburb of Beirut known as Dahia. Analysts noted not just the movements above ground, but the sign of hardened infrastructure below. Security rotations shifted at predictable intervals. A pattern emerged. On one side were analysts poring over imagery and signals. On the other, human sources unnamed, many operating under pressure, reporting comings and going. Both streams of intelligence converged into assessments that were briefed up and down corridors of power. The consequence of that convergence would be irreversible. An operation of this scale does not happen on impulse. In capitals, legal teams, military planners, and political leaders debate the costs. Cabinet rooms weigh the strategic value against possible escalation. A signal masculation can ignite broader conflict. Yet, according to multiple letter reports, a decision was taken, a choice that those in power framed as limited, necessary, precise. What is critical here is human psychology. Once an intelligence mosaic coalesces, pressure builds to act. Those advocating action must answer two questions. Is the intelligence reliable? And is the timing right? In the weeks before the strike, a confluence of signals convinced planners that the risk of inaction outweighed the risk of action. The strike produced massive destruction to the targeted complex and the buildings above it. Dozens of people were killed and hundreds wounded. Hezbollah later confirmed the death of its longtime leader. The confirmation ended public certainty about the strike's most consequential result. How do you tell this night as a story without sensationalism? You map sequences, observations, approach, execution, immediate aftermath. Witnesses in the area, anonymous, disoriented, describe a city that had been ordinary 1 hour and irrevocably altered the next. Emergency responders went into chaotic rescue mode. Intelligence centers lit up. Analysts hunched over live feeds. Diplomats began to make calls. We cannot tell this story without human texture. An unnamed security official, someone who used to brief journalists off the record, told colleges later that one of the hardest parts was the moral calculus. Weighing civilian risk against perceived strategic again. A local doctor who asked not to be named for safety recalled that hospitals filled with the injured, many of whom were relatives and neighbors of those inside the targeted complex. These small, anonymous accounts are the connective tissue that turns a strategy into consequence. They remind us that intelligence maps and operational orders are translated at a street level into human grief, displacement, and fear. Confirmation, when it came, reverberated. Governments reacted, allies and adversaries recalculated. Tehran and capitals across the region watched closely. Militias and state actors adapted. On multiple fronts, the event accelerated already existing dynamics. Escalatory rhetoric hardened, retaliatory planning intensified, and ordinary citizens faced new uncertainty about safety and supply lines. One striking feature in the first 72 hours was the speed of information and disinformation. Social platforms filled with videos, unverified claims, and competing narratives. In modern conflict, the information battle often runs parallel to kinetic events. Here, it shaped perceptions just as much as the strikes shaped the ground. Even with confirmation, many questions remained. Which units were directly responsible? What human sources mattered most? Were there leaks, double agents, or materials? Some reports hinted the cooperation and at malls. Other accounts suggested sophisticated technical surveillance. Importantly, hard proof of many of these details remained withheld or classified, leaving room for speculation. That vacuum is fertile ground for conspiracy, not because conspiracies are true, but because humans crave closure. The less transparent the answer, the more stories rush to fill the silence. As storytellers, we must be precise about what is documented and what is not. A top leader's death reshapes organization and myth. Followers can rally, revolts can fracture, state actors smell opportunity. In Hezbollah's case, the loss of a central figure removed a unifying public voice, but did not, overnight, erase institutional capability. New leaders, different tactics, altered priorities. All of these are part of the recalibration that follows such a blow. From an intelligence perspective, the removal of one node in a network often reveals how redundant or fragile the system was. Analysts sought to understand whether the organization had planned for succession and how quickly command structures could reconstitute. This story is not an apology for any side. It is an account for choices. Choices made in rooms with maps and screens. Choices that ripple into neighborhoods and morgues. If you want to keep pulling at the threads that hold modern conflicts together, the human stories, the hidden decisions, the quiet moments before a headline, stay with us. We'll follow the evidence, respect the facts, and tell the stories that history almost forgot. Subscribe and hear what the shadows say next.